Okay, my name is Mike Tennenbaum, and thank you for sticking around. I work with Dr. David Fu, Dr. Robert, and his campus at Georgia Tech, and I'm going to be talking to you about ants. So, the first question is always, why fire ants? And the reason I work with fire ants is because fire ants are maps. So fire ants are native to a region in South America that floods regularly. And so, as a survival mechanism, they developed the ability to form these rafts. And these rafts are entirely formed out of ants. There's no sticks, there's no leaves, it's just ants in the raft. All the ants survive the raft. And this ability to form the raft has given them lots of other interesting properties. So because they can hook together and they can form these linkages, you can get sort of elastic effects where they can make bridges or towers. But since this is a continually active rearranging system, you can also get flow, just like one on a teapot. So now, to classify this, the first thing we did is we did a couple of tabletop experiments. So this first one on the left is showing, once in place, it's going to show the fluid nature of the fire ant aggregation. So this is the fire ants that have been trapped inside a quasi-two-dimensional plane, and we're dropping a penny through them. So this is analogous to if you took a steel ball bearing and dropped it through honey. You could measure the viscosity in the system. So this is showing that there is a viscous nature to the ant aggregation. Now, in addition to this, we've also got elastic behavior. So you can swirl an ant colony into a ball, and you can compress it with a petri dish. And if you remove the compression, then the ant colony springs back. So we've got viscous behavior, we've got elastic behavior. And so what I do is I'm working on characterizing the viscoelastic nature of the fire ants. So to do that, what I do is rheology. And so here, this is the rheometer that we use. This is the ants in the setup, though I realize it's probably a little hard to see on the screen. What you can take away from this is there's a bottom plate that's not moving. We have a containment cylinder to keep the ants inside the machine. And we've got a top plate that we have very fine control over, so we can apply forces or speeds or displacements really precisely. So now, the test that I'm going to be talking about today is called small amplitude oscillatory shear. So what we're doing in small amplitude oscillatory shear is we're applying a very small oscillatory shear. So what we're doing is we're applying the strain, and then we're measuring the stress that it takes to actually make that strain happen. And you'll see here that there's a lag between the stress and the strain. And so this lag means that we can break up the stress into an in-phase component and an out-of-phase component. So the in-phase component, this is the elastic response to the system. It's called the storage modulus, or G prime. Now the out-of-phase component is related to the viscosity of the system, or how much energy is dissipated. It's called the loss modulus, or G double prime, just to get to know it. Now what's really cool about ants is that if you measure the storage and loss modulus as a function of frequency, you see that a couple of really cool things. The first is that they're congruent. So fire ants are equally viscous and elastic throughout the entire frequency range that we probed during this experiment. Now the other thing that's kind of cool is that they're power law, so it scales up as I'm going to get to the end. But really the cool thing to take away here is that it's equally viscous and equally elastic. Now that's something that hasn't been seen in other living rheological experiments in the past. Now, if this was done at a density of 0.34 grams per centimeter cubed, if you start increasing the density, we can look at what happens there. And so what happens there is that as you pack in more and more ants, you run out of space to move around. And so your system becomes predominantly elastic. This is characterized by the storage modulus being much larger than the loss modulus, and you don't have any more frequency dependence, so that's gone away. So this is what you'd see if you took just an elastic medium and did rheology on it. Now, so as we go from low density to high density, we are both flattening out and our storage modulus is increasing. The other way that we can, the other comparison that we can do to this is we can see, ask the question of, is this an activity effect? Is it because the ants are alive, or is it because the ants are ant-shaped? And to do that, to answer that question, we can compare our results with dead ants. So these are experiments for dead ants at the same densities that the colors correspond to. And what you can see here is that at every density, the dead ants are always elastic. So there's no frequency dependence, and they always have a storage modulus that's larger than the loss modulus. So they're always storing more energy than they're dissipating. Whereas for live ants, it's only at the largest densities that you see the same thing. So at the lowest densities, you see this congruence where they're equally storing and dissipating energy. This is based on the activity of the ants themselves, not on the geometry of the body of the ants. So to conclude, what we can say is that live ants are equally viscous and elastic at the lowest densities. Dead ants are always elastic, and at large density, live ants behave like dead ants. This is essentially squishing out the activity of the system so that you get elastic behavior. Any questions?
Thanks all of the speakers from the Georgia Tech session. Again, my apologies, we went long. Our leader has instructed us that we need to run the lunch now, so we can be back at 1:45.
Please be back at 1:45. There are two very important people. There's a meeting.
One. Oh.